Chapter 29 of Workers Together. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Workers Together, or an Endless Chain, by Pansy. Chapter 29. A Modern Den of Lions. It was not the sort of talk that he had intended to have with her. Little had been said about theaters, yet Robert, as he reverted to the subject, said within himself that he would look it up carefully some time, to be exhaustively prepared. But, after all, a man's duty was plain enough. Had he met Hester Mason before he did Mr. Herbert, he would have declined his invitation in a different manner. He could not help smiling to think that the girl's flashes of logic had done his arguing for him. "She is clear-headed," he said to himself for the third time that morning. "She ought to have opportunities. I wonder what Miss Joy could do for her." Then he went to his counter, strongly fortified for the temptations of the day, as though Satan had a hand in the management of nothing but theaters. 10 o'clock brought a meek-faced searcher after narrow laces. He courteously displayed his variety to her, with skillful arrangement as to patterns and qualities. The meek-faced woman studied them carefully, critically, and then asked her timid question: "Are these real?" Real lace of those widths for $1 a yard! The question was one that had constantly to be answered, and the temptation had proved too much for some of the clerks. Again and again had Robert glibly replied, "Oh, yes, certainly," exchanging meantime surreptitious winks with some unemployed looker-on. Since any shopper was so ignorant as to expect real things at such prices, why should not they have their fun out of it? "Real cotton, I meant, of course," had Robert gaily explained to a fellow clerk the next time he had occasion to answer the question, and the witticism had been received with such favor, and been repeated and laughed over so much, that Robert Parks had really begun to consider it rather brilliant. It was not a falsehood. Of course, he could never stoop to that. There are people, older than he, who have soothed their consciences by equally silly subterfuges. Here was the old question confronting him, but it found him changed toward it. That subtle change, invisible to human eye, whatever it was, however produced, met him even at this point, and made him see that his silly witticism shrouded a weak lie. The presence of God's Spirit enlightens the mind even about so-called trivial subjects. He hesitated just a moment. His face flushed slightly. It was curious that just then he should think of Daniel. This certainly was not a den of lions, and yet he was a little humiliated to discover that it required pluck. Business was not brisk at this early hour. 2 idle clerks leaned on their respective counters, regarding him with an amused air, wondering what was up. "No," he said boldly at last. "They are considered a good imitation, but they are not real, of course, at that price. We have real laces, but they are more than double the price of these. Shall I show you some?" "No," the lady answered, and thanked him, then fingered the imitation laces with a thoughtful air for a few moments, and moved away. Amused voices greeted Robert. "There, my man, you've done it now. You've gone and lost a customer. She would have taken a dozen yards or so, and she can get real laces in all the stores for that price. You know she can. She will come back tomorrow and tell you so." "Parks, what's the matter? Did you have bad dreams last night? Think you are going to die, or anything of that sort?" Still a third voice chiming in. "I say, Parks, has that solemn-faced Dr. Everett been telling you stories about the little boy with his hatchet who couldn't tell a lie? Didn't you ever hear of him before? You mustn't be so overcome by his example. He's played out. He wasn't a dry goods merchant, you see, or he would have learned in less than a week that he could." What was the annoyed young man to say? He was excessively annoyed. It vexed him to think that he could not take this silly banter good-naturedly, that his cheeks would glow under it. Here was an opportunity to state his change of base. Why didn't he do it? It wasn't exactly a lack of moral courage that held him back. It was a doubt as to how best to put what he wanted to say. Would they understand him? How much should he try to tell them? "What was the use of teasing her?" he said at last. She really did not know but that they were real, and she doesn't know but that she ought to get the real thing at such prices. I didn't want to cheat her. I've done it, I know, but I don't intend to after this. If Mr. Cady should hear of our management with those people, we should hear from him, I imagine." This was not a very bold avowal. Any right-minded young man, without a shred of Christian principle to sustain him, might be supposed to have as much honor as this. Robert was simply astonished over the amount of courage that it had taken to speak those words, "Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." It would have been so easy for him to have taken such a stand when he first entered the store. "Good boy," said Fred Briggs. "He shall have a stick of red and white candy and 2 nuts as soon as ever I get a chance to step out for them." Certainly there was nothing particularly brilliant in that reply, yet the clerks within hearing greeted it with bursts of laughter, and Robert's face flushed to the roots of his hair. "Talk about a den of lions," he muttered. "I would rather be in one, I believe." Which was all very well so long as he was sure there were none waiting for him. The day which had begun so brightly was in many respects a trying one. The spirit of fun, or of recklessness, seemed to have taken possession of the clerks in Robert's immediate neighborhood. In the course of the day it became apparent that some rumor in regard to the prayer meeting of the evening before was in circulation. He found notices pinned to his counter, announcing religious services to be conducted by the Reverend Robert Parks. One, caricatured with bold headlines, announced a sermon on the sin of lying, to be delivered by the once notorious but now famous Robert Parks. In short, there seemed no end to the silly schemes which 4 clerks devised to render his life disagreeable. Yet they did nothing that was worthy of complaint; at least, I mean nothing that Robert cared to bring to the notice of his chief. Under ordinary circumstances he would have laughed with them over some of their sallies, but he was continually haunted by a humiliating sense of having failed to stand up squarely for his new principles. Had he boldly avowed his determination henceforth to shape all his actions to one pattern, very much of this annoyance might have been avoided. Evidently he was no Daniel. He began to have a realizing sense of this truth. Viewed in that light, the experience was helpful; for if there was one person whom this young man needed to understand better than he did, it was Robert Parks. Toward the close of the afternoon, just as he was recalling, with a sense of relief, the fact that his services would not be required during the evening, there came a fresh embarrassment. A party planned for long before must needs perfect its arrangements for that very evening. A ride to Belden's woods, a supper, a dance, and much that the gay party denominated fun, were in prospect. The ringleader looked in on Robert, just to inform him that all arrangements were complete; not to invite him to join them; this was accepted as a matter of course. Had he not been prominent in arranging the program when the plan was first proposed? In the midst of his embarrassment he realized, with a little thrill of satisfaction, that there was certainly a change in his feelings. How utterly distasteful the whole affair looked to him now. "Matters are all in train," the caller said, with a complacent air. "There has been a little trouble about securing horses, but we have succeeded. You will have to notify your lady, you know. Sorry to be so late, but we will not need to start for 2 hours yet." He hurried these sentences without chance for interruption, and was turning in haste to depart. "Wait," said Robert, his voice having a sharp, annoyed sound. "Wait a moment, can't you?" And then he paused. What was he to say, how explain, after all the vexations of the day, and with those exasperating clerks still watching him with their silly smiles and winks? Still, it seemed clear to him that he would not go to Belden's woods. A moonlight ride, and a merry dance, and plenty of gay company, had been pleasant enough amusements to him in the past; but today they offered no temptation, beyond the fact that his word was pledged, and he did not see his way clear to decline. "The man who seems to me the most worthy of contempt is the one who has not sufficient moral courage to break a promise after he discovers that it ought never to have been made." Something like this Joy Saunders had said. He had not known that he remembered her words, but they flashed before him now as though they had been photographed. "The fact is, I can't go." He spoke abruptly, confusedly, not helped by Fred Briggs's laugh sounding in his ears. The words were spoken, but they seemed weak ones to him, and he did not feel brave at all. "Can't? Why not? We made sure that you were not detailed here for service before we perfected our plans. I was in this morning before you came down, and Mr. Wheeler told me your department would close at 6. Then did that brave young man wish heartily that he could have replied that different arrangements had been made, and he must remain at the store. How should he explain? If Fred Briggs would only move away and attend to his own affairs. The next question was worse. "When can you go, then? We depended on you. In fact, you were the one who suggested the plan, if you remember. I suppose we could wait an hour later if that would help you." "Oh, no," said this much-tried young man. "I shouldn't want you to do that. The truth is, I don't think I can go at all. I have made other arrangements that interfere." "Do they interfere for life?" The tone was not one of astonishment simply, but of ill-concealed sarcasm. The question and the blank look on Robert's face were too much for Fred Briggs. He bent himself over his desk, apparently overjoyed, and convulsed with laughter. "The poor parson is in a fearful mix," he said in a loud undertone to the equally amused clerk at his side. "Clear the counter. Let's hoist him up here, and give him a chance to explain." Chapter 29. Recording by Trisha G.